In this documentary, we're going to be looking at what happened to the Amiga, what were Commodore's future plans, who were Escom, who were Gateway, why did they buy the machine, and the overall decline of the machine. This video is supported by PCBWay. If you're like me and always have an electronics project on the go, check out PCBWay.com. They offer some great services such as 3D printing, CNC milling, prototyping, but also a 24-hour turnaround on PCBs. Don't forget to check out their open source community, PCBWay Plus, and we thank them for supporting this channel. The Amiga CD32 was Commodore's last-ditch attempt at saving the company from bankruptcy. The console was released on the 17th of September 1993 and only lasted 8 months. In the Christmas period following its launch, Commodore couldn't actually keep up with demand. The CD32 accounted for 30% of all CD-ROM sales in the UK, actually exceeding the sales of the Mega CD, and eventually they sold 100,000 units in Europe. But Commodore had shot themselves in the foot. They had a huge American patent lawsuit which actually made them unable to sell the console in the USA, meaning a lot of them got dumped in factories in the Philippines. They rushed to release the console, pushing it forward. This really annoyed developers, put them off developing for the console, creating exclusive titles. This meant that many of the titles were kind of shovelware, just a floppy disk with a few improvements. If you were lucky, you'd get an FMV, you'd maybe get a CD soundtrack. And then Commodore declared bankruptcy on April the 29th, 1994. But what had Commodore planned for the future? Were they going to keep pumping out the same old outdated technology, or were they going to go with a drastic change? Amiga may have looked very old and dated by then, but you have to remember, when the Amiga came out in 1985, it was miles ahead of the competition. Would Commodore be able to do this leap in 1995-96? Was it too late? What did the engineers and staff have planned? The Amiga has always been built around a custom chipset, and different versions have been developed over time. Probably the most famous and highly anticipated was the Advanced Amiga Architecture chipset, which was developed in 1988 and cancelled in 1994. But that's another story for another video. In this video, we're going to be looking at the RISC-based chipset called Hombre. So what is the Hombre chipset? Well, Commodore began to design a new 64-bit 3D graphics chipset on Hewlett-Packard's PA RISC architecture. It was in conjunction with Hewlett-Packard over an estimated 18-month period. Now, Hombre is based on 2 chips, a system controller chip and a display controller chip. Engineer Dave Haney said it would portray little resemblance to previous Amigas. There have been no plans to provide an Amiga OS port or offer compatibility with previous models. Here's a clip of Dave on my podcast, The Retro Hour, actually talking about the Hombre chipset and the plans for the CD64.
You may have heard something about Hombre.
Mm-hmm. That was a chipset, yeah?
That's a chips. That was a 2-chip set, maybe with some extra stuff that did. It had its own built-in PowerPC processor that was designed in-house. It had its own graphics system, which was chunky graphics, completely different than Amiga. I mean, it took some Amiga ideas and expanded on them. Like you could have 4 16-bit deep play fields. So 16-bit chunky pixels, 4 play fields of that. It had 3. The PowerPC instruction set had been expanded to include 3D instructions. So you would actually have, not like today's GPUs with thousands of processing units, but for the day it would have had some pretty sweet 3D graphics potential. That was designed to, with the 2 chips and maybe some some small bit some low cost IO chips, that would have been your game machine. But then you put that on a card, it spoke PCI, and it would have been a pretty nice graphics card with its own PowerPC chip sitting there to run OpenGL or whatever you wanted to run on it, with the 3D instructions and all. So we would have had a pretty good add-in graphics card at the same time. And I was at, from 1991 on, I was working on essentially what you might call the A5000. I was working on the next generation architecture. was kind of funny because Ed Hepler was kind of working in secret on Hombre. I was working mostly in secret, not secret like I wasn't telling anybody about it, just secret because it was one of these Skunkworks projects that wasn't really, it was just like, something I chose to work on. And we had both decided that PCI was the way to go because of the standards, because it actually solved a bunch of problems for, a small pin count, high speed going from chip to chip, that sort of thing. So we had independently built systems that would have supported each other's new stuff had we gotten that far.
And this Hombre chipset, would that kind of been like a CD64 kind of console system then?
Yeah, the first one would have probably been some, it might. I'm not sure there's anything in there that was really 64, but that never stopped Sega or anybody else from using that word. So, it would have been something like that. It would have been, I doubt it was fast enough to emulate an Amiga, but it would have been an upgrade. I mean, the one thing is that game consoles didn't really have to be compatible, didn't have to be backward compatible. I mean, that's sort of come and gone between generations, but at that point that would have taken these the CD32 from being a pretty good game machine to, wow, this is like up there with Sony or whoever is making the best machines that day, that particular week.
Was it kind of on par with the PlayStation 1 like in terms of power then? I
think it would probably be faster in some things and slower on others, but it's hard to say exactly. I think the place I'd have to look back. It's been so long looking at those systems. But I think same basic idea plus the CD. Obviously you need that. You needed that at that point for the game capacity. Weren't quite ready for DVD yet.
Now, the CD64 as a console was kind of in early conceptual stages. There's still limited details on its capabilities, and I'm going to be showing you a bit of fan art in the background of kind of recreations that people have done of the CD64, 3D printed case by the wonderful Amiga Ang. Now, the existing specifications of the CD64 would indicate that it offers similar graphics performance to the Sega Saturn if that was using the Hombre chipset. It would also have OpenGL support, which would be on the CD, avoiding the cost of a Kickstart ROM. Now, of course, you can't have a Commodore product without David Pleasant's marketing dude making a comment about it, and he says the CD64 might want to change the name to avoid confusion with the C64, good point, and it will run circles around the new unreleased Sega Saturn and Nintendo Project Reality. So was that just kind of hype? Well, I don't know, because I don't know what David Pleasance has seen. I don't know what Dave Haney's seen. I don't know what Ed Hepler's seen. But I do know I've seen a document that's on archive.org that I'm going to link in the description, which shows that they were taking this seriously. They had a meeting with Philips 2 days before bankruptcy. And, Philips was pretty much Sony's big rival at the time. None of these future plans came about, and the German computer manufacturer Escom ended up buying Amiga in 1995. Escom was founded in 1991 by Manfred Schmidt. As an offshoot from his music company, it was previously known as Schmidt Computers Limited. Early on, the company sold Commodore 64 computers, but then it branched out into the IBM clone market, eventually rising to become the biggest PC manufacturer in Germany. Getting stock and reliable suppliers for a new company has always been challenging. When Escom first started, they were in desperate need of stock for the Christmas season of 1991. Manfred made a phone call to Commodore, and he was put in contact with Petro Tishchenko, who at the time was Commodore's Global Logistics Director. Happy to sell them some product, Petro made sure they had an ample supply of C64s, just in time for the Christmas season. This really helped Escom from folding in those early days. Escom had a strong retail presence in Germany. They had dedicated stores with customer service, sales reps and displays. This may seem standard nowadays, but back in the 90s hardly anyone was selling out of retail units in Europe, apart from independent retailers and computer stores. In Germany they were operating 27 retail outlets, and were considered the world leader in computer retail sales at the time. The UK sales model was very much mail order based. There were some independent retail stores, and the main retail chain was PC World, with over 14 stores nationwide. Escom wanted to move into UK retail, and were well positioned, already operating plants in Germany and the Netherlands. They spotted an opportunity to enter the UK market when Rumbelows, the electronics retailer, folded. Bernard Van Tienen of Escom said, "People want to touch the machines before buying them, and they want to take them away immediately." Escom purchased 168 old Rumbelows stores and converted them into Escom Retail units, eventually leading to Escom operating around 300 stores worldwide. With the Commodore 64 being one of the most popular computers in the world, Commodore was still the second biggest seller of PCs in retail volume when they went bankrupt in 1994. When they went bankrupt, many parties showed interest in purchasing Commodore and the Amiga assets. Samsung Electronics, Philips Electronics, Amstrad plc, Escom, Gateway, IBM, Acer, Commodore UK, Newstar Electronics and Creative Equipment International. Commodore UK was still operating. They were working with Newstar Electronics and Creative Equipment International on a bid. Newstar Electronics, however, were doing a deal with Escom at the time and decided to pull out of the UK's bid. This left Commodore UK high and dry and they were no longer able to bid, leading Creative Equipment International to then decide to back Dell instead of Commodore UK. With so many parties involved, the auctioneer made sure everybody bidding would have to put down a £1 million deposit. So now the stage was set. It was between two bidders. In one corner we had Dell and Creative Equipment International, and in the other Escom and Newstar Electronics. Escom also had a bit of behind-the-scenes pressure from IBM, who were really interested in Dell not getting hold of certain assets in the deal. Escom ended up winning the bidding process for only $12 million, even though Dell had bid $15 million. The creditors and lawyers decided this was only fair because Escom had been first to put their bid in and have it accepted. Dell, however, had set conditions, such as allow a 30-day waiting period to look over everything and decide if they wanted to keep it, which the creditors decided was unfair and would have restarted the whole process again. IBM and Escom had a close relationship after the buyout. They did many deals, and one of those deals turned out to be a fatal move for Escom. IBM managed to convince all the leading PC manufacturers like Vobis Microcomputer, Escom and Comtech that their operating system OS2 Warp would garner over 40% of the German market, making it the country's biggest selling OS and beating Windows 95. All the German companies then proceeded to make preload agreements with IBM, preloading OS2 Warp onto their machine. This became a fatal move for Escom, but we'll cover that later in part 2. Escom were originally not interested in the Amiga name, even though they'd talked a lot about the future in the buyout process. They seemed mostly interested in the Commodore name, as it was still the second biggest manufacturer of PCs at the time. So they split the brands and assets into two groups. The first group was Commodore Holdings BV, who owned the Commodore brand name and all the assets. They then packaged the Amiga brand and assets together for quick resale. However, after purchasing the Amiga, they got hounded by thousands of Amiga users, writing to them, phoning them, and they suddenly realised there was a huge, strong existing user base still out there. They decided to take the brand and assets and put them all underneath one name, and that would be called Amiga Technologies, and they made Petro Chischenko the director. Maybe they could produce some more product and sell it to these users through the Escom retail stores. Now, the first move Petro did was insist that Amiga Technologies should operate as a viable business without any financial help from Escom, mainly making its money through sales of Amiga products and licensing the name and assets worldwide. When Escom purchased the Amiga, loads had to be put in place before they could begin operating again. The factories had been shut down and stockpiles of stock were all over the world. Amiga Technologies really wanted to define themselves and separate themselves from the Commodore Amiga period. This required a new image, a new design. They really wanted to depart from the old 80s tick logo. One of the areas Amiga was still relevant in Europe was presentations and fantastic software such as Scala. Scala was still a market leader in presentation software. Based in Europe, they had beautiful infographics, fantastic smooth scrolling fonts that really couldn't be matched by any other software at the time. So Amiga Technologies invited the designer Bjorn Rebacken from Scala to their opening press conference in Frankfurt to share his ideas with the public. He presented a new design for the Amiga 4000 tower case, and it was very different from the previous machines. The Amiga logo had been replaced with a new logo. It was the letter A in a highly abstracted form, a triangle. He then sliced the triangle into 3 bars, all of different lengths, and left a choice between using them horizontally or tilting them 60 degrees. Initially the logo was tilted until he realised that was essentially the Adidas brand logo. So instead, he favoured turning the logo horizontally, and the Amiga community reacted to this logo, often calling it the beehive or the Christmas tree. After a few days, Amiga Technologies received a letter from a Usenet user. He'd noticed that the logo was being used for the Church of Scientology's Dianetics program. Initially, some people within Amiga Technologies thought it might not be an issue, but eventually Peter Kittel of Amiga Technologies stated, "Now we have learnt that this is practically the Scientology logo, we won't use it." They then hired another designer, this time a company called Frog Designs, to create the Bondi font logo with the red square, leading many Usenet and Amiga users to question why they needed to hire a design agency for such a simple logo. Now, what did Escom do with the Commodore assets? Escom built a few rebranded PCs with the Commodore logo and sold them commercially. They were not very interesting, just beige boxes rebadged really. But they also created some quite cool and unique Commodore products. First, we have their attempt at an internet computer called the Commodore WebIT. It was essentially a 486 PC with internet access and a built-in C64 emulator. The last product they produced was an IBM compatible laptop called the F6000T in a nice form factor with a TFT screen. I've tried to find more information on Commodore's Escom machines, but it's really hard to find anything online. Amiga Technologies had rebranded, but they had a big task ahead of them. They had to get all the Amiga product back in one place as it was spread all around the world. The manufacturing plants had shut down, so they had to restart production at their French factory near Bordeaux. Displays were essential, especially seeing the Amiga had a different mode to other computers. They contacted Microvitec based in Bradford, England. They'd previously made Commodore compatible monitors, so they then produced 3 new models for Escom. They had to decide how to repackage and build these machines. First they started with the Amiga 1200. They first started producing them in France with, leftover stock, including old motherboards. They even used cheaper capacitors than Commodore, and the main change was that they added the 3.1 Kickstart ROM, whereas the original Commodore machines only had the 3.0 Kickstart ROM. They came up with 2 packages for the 1200. The first was the Amiga Magic package. This was a 1200 in a single box with 2 games, deluxe paint, WordWorth 2 processor, print manager. It was £500 and it came with an added hard drive. The other package was the Amiga Surfer package, which consisted of an Amiga 1200 with a hard drive, a modem, internet software, and the package was really interesting because it actually included the ability to connect to IBM's internet link with 100 hours free. To be closer to their huge amount of retail stores, they decided to move production into Irvine, Scotland, and that's where the trouble started. They started to make later revisions of motherboards, and that was really appreciated by the Amiga community. Amiga floppy drives were very specific. Amiga Technology really struggled to find a supply of these drives and ended up using high-density drives with a wire soldered to the motherboard to fix compatibility issues. The only problem was, it didn't fully fix them. It left the drives unable to read certain files or even write to disk. This led to many users hacking PC drives to work in the A1200 and many Escom fixers coming out in the community. In Scotland they started to produce Amiga 4000Ts. They changed the Commodore round and front and added a more square form factor to the tower. It still had 6 MB of RAM, but they included a 1 GB hard drive and a 060 processor running at 50 MHz. However, due to Escom's increasing financial difficulties, the 4000T wasn't even advertised or displayed in any of their shops. It's rumoured to have only sold over 2,000 machines worldwide. Now, Escom had stores all over the UK and Germany, and they were proudly displaying the Amiga 1200 in the window. The only problem was none of the staff had training or knowledge of the machine. There's a fantastic article, The Truth About Escom, and it's written by Andrew Elliott, and it's from an Amiga fan's perspective inside Escom. I heard stories of many of the machines being displayed in the windows just showing the Kickstart loading screen, and this spurred Usenet users on to start a campaign of going into shops, showing them demos and educating the employees about their beloved machine. My experience personally was going into an Escom store with my father, overjoyed that they'd bought Amiga. I asked the sales assistant about the new Amiga Magic Pack. He looked at me blankly and pulled something from under the desk, asking, "One of these thingies?" While Amiga Technologies was running and selling new stock, they licensed the Amiga name and technologies worldwide. The first company was Virtual I.O. Now, Virtual I.O. was previously known as Virtual Projects GmbH, and it was a subsidiary of Escom AG. Escom had plans to use this company to produce the latest in 3D and VR technology. Before the Amiga deal, they developed a product known as eyeglasses, and they were released in 1995. They consisted of two 640 by 480 resolution screens and supported the PAL video standard. Virtual I.O. had arranged a deal with Microsoft and IBM to get the glasses compatible with Windows 95 and OS2. They also had support for all the major gaming systems from people like Sega, Nintendo and Sony. I'm pretty sure they hadn't even considered Amiga support until the Escom deal happened. These glasses were advertised in Escom's Amiga promotions, they were sold in the retail stores, and they really made a big deal out of them. Sadly, the glasses only supported two games, and that was Gloom Deluxe and Nemac. The glasses made a commercial impact, but just like many other VR products of the time, users complained of sickness, dizziness, headaches, migraines, and they were really frustrated because it had massively heavy cables and a gigantic power supply. Another licensee was Newstar. Now, you may remember Newstar, they originally entered the deal with Escom, and they were set to be the distributor for Western markets. But this didn't happen. Instead, that was awarded to Tietzin Trust and Investment Co., who had a factory near Beijing. But Newstar did, however, manage to get an Amiga license and went on to produce the 68K based Amiga 5A00. According to the Vice President and Chairman Jingjai Li, the Amiga 5A00 was an internet-enabled machine that had a 68,000 processor and would run on version 3.1 of Amiga OS. Now, it's not commonly known if this machine was released or publicly available. There doesn't seem to be many around, so if there's any information on this, it would be amazing to see. And if you've heard of this machine, please leave some info in the comments. Newstar were a subsidiary of Lotus Pacific, and so was another company, Regent Electronics Corporation, and Regent went on to produce the Wonder TV, A6000 and A6060. They had some help from DCE, the German manufacturers, and they created quite a cool machine. To me it looks like a CD TV or a CD32 on crack. Now, all of these relationships and contracts and licenses and patents needed to go through the Chinese government, and we think this may have slowed down a lot of stuff. But the machines were really cool. They were essentially an Amiga computer, a fax machine, an internet box, audio CD plus CDG player, MPEG video CD player, a photo CD viewer, had teleweb broadcast information, which was kind of like teletext, and of course it was a karaoke player. Many people have questioned why Escom went bankrupt. Being one of the world's leading PC retailers, how could they messed up so quickly? There's probably lots of factors why Escom went bankrupt, but these are the two reasons that stand out for me. Extended warranties. Now, extended warranties suddenly became a great way of making extra money out of the customer. With people buying a PC every 4 to 5 years, they're a great way of getting more revenue. So every Escom customer got a 1-year guarantee straight away. They soon realised if they turned this into a 3-year guarantee, they could charge about £160 extra plus VAT on the top of each sale. So over half a year About a third of the Escom computers were all sold with these extended warranties. This led to extra pressure from sales reps in the stores, trying to do the hard sell with warranties. And, these warranties and customer support weren't even ran by Escom. It was by a company called ICL Sorbus. And interestingly, when Escom went bankrupt, ICL Sorbus were taking around 1,000 to 2,000 calls a day from really angry Escom customers who'd lost a lot of cash on these warranties. The other reason is the OS2 deal. We talked about the OS2 deal in the first part of this video. Essentially, Escom and many PC manufacturers entered a deal with IBM to preload OS2 on their machine instead of Windows 95. This meant Escom had to convince customers to use OS2 or install Windows at home. This led to a huge surplus of OS2 machines, causing Escom to have increasingly desperate-looking fire sales. Now, many companies were interested in buying the Amiga assets, and one of the most famous ones that a lot of you have probably heard about was Viscorp. Now, Viscorp stands for Visual Information Services Corp. It was a really interesting company. It was ran by Bill Buck. Now, Bill Buck went on later to form Genesis, and with the Pegasus machines, and fund Morphos. Amazingly, it had Paul Allen on board as well. So Paul Allen, the founder of Microsoft, was on the board of Viscorp. Many Amiga pioneers were involved, including Carl Sessenrath, who was creator of the Amiga kernel. The idea behind Viscorp was they would use Amiga chips and technology to create set-top boxes that turned your TV into an internet device with a beautiful custom OS interface. The concept was sound, but it might have been a bit too far ahead of its time. They produced a unit called the Viscorp Ed, and quite a few of them seem to be available online. Now, with powerful people on board, it really looked like Viscorp were going to take over the Amiga assets. They were so close, in fact, that many Amiga magazines paraded them around as the successful bidders. All the information I can find on their side of the deal was this quote: "The agreement is subject to approval of both boards of directors. Industry observers reckon the deal is worth 40 million. Now, 40 million seems like an absolutely crazy amount, seeing Escom bought it for 14, but maybe there were other assets or companies involved that would justify the higher price tag. After being unsuccessful with the bid, Viscorp went through a series of disagreements, arguments, open messages to the community, and boardroom shenanigans. That led to them changing the company name to US Digital Communications Inc., and they eventually disappeared, becoming a victim of the dot-com crash. Another company you may have heard of was Quikpak. Now, Quikpak had been licensed to build the Amiga 4000 towers and A1200 components in North America. They created Amiga 4000s and called them the Power Towers, with larger cases containing more drives and a bigger PSU. These machines were kind of aimed at video toaster owners. They also produced some accelerators such as the 4060, and they had cool options like 32-bit DMA SCSI, which was really cool to have on those machines and great if you're video editing. So these guys were still producing machines as Escom stopped, and they were still producing 4000 in North America. They kept in communication with Amiga users, they kept in communication with other companies, and they were well established. As a creditor of Amiga Technologies, they were really interested in seeing the future of Amiga handled properly. So they went into the bidding process, and with quite a loaded line here, they said, Quikpak believes that there is more to the Amiga than a simple set-top box. Now we get to the second Amiga bankruptcy and buyout. Now this was a lot harder to cover than the first Amiga buyout because we had journalists there were press reports, but this buyout, the second one, was a lot more of a shadier affair than before. It was held in private by Herr Hembach, and the bidders bid through external companies. There were lots of rumours and confusion. From what we know, the companies involved were Microsoft Corporation, Sony Corporation, Philips Electronics and Gateway. Gateway won and paid around $13 million for 47 Amiga patents. They also took on Petro Tishchenko. He seemed to be the public face of Amiga at the time, and it was a very easy move to make him the president of Amiga from Amiga International to Amiga Inc. And the Commodore assets were sold separately to Dutch company Tulip Computers. With Gateway winning, you'd think it would all be done and dusted. But Lotus Pacific came in with some last-minute trouble. Lotus suddenly announced that they bought the Amiga patents in Asia. Lotus claimed that this was the case from the very start of their deal with Escom. New Star Electronics, Region and Right Timing based in New Jersey were all subsidiaries of Lotus Pacific. So Lotus Pacific basically said, we own the complete rights. They looked through the original license and found out that the rights were only given for production and trading, not complete ownership of the Amiga patents. This was starting to grow into a huge legal battle and could have been huge trouble for Gateway, but both companies ended up reaching an agreement in 1998. Now, during the transfer, there was an issue with OS 3.1. So OS 3.1 was being sold by Villagetronic, and during the transfer, the actual assets had not gone from Escom to Gateway. They said that there was no time to prepare for the court case and they had no supportive evidence. Eventually this was resolved and the dispute between Escom and Villagetronics stopped and ultimately led to them not selling OS 3.1 and the rights being transferred over to Gateway. And in 1998, Lotus Pacific appeared on Gateway's official license. Looking at the world in 1997, the N64 had just been launched. The PlayStation was well established and had just got DualShock controllers. Apple had introduced the first Power Macintosh G3 desktop, which was PowerPC based. People were playing Quake 2, listening to music on Real Player, using AOL Messenger and burning CDs. So why did they want to buy Amiga at this point with such advancements in other technology? Well, in the Escom Bankruptcy sale, there were kind of 11 firms that were bidding for the Amiga asset and the patent portfolio. Some of these companies were big players. They were made of legacy employees as well. So there was a few that had a vision for Amiga and kind of wanted to keep it as a relevant player in the computing industry. So Quikpak was one. They'd previously helped distribute Amigas in the American market. Viscorp was another company that had been formed, and Pios, who wanted to use kind of Apple chips and the PowerPC architecture and go that way with the Amiga. But these guys struggled to raise any finance, and the buyout ended up being held in the German bankruptcy courts in private, so there's not many details about it. Now, why did people want to buy Amiga at this point? Well, the patents were still very valuable and they were still valid. So from what I've seen and what people have discussed in interviews and online, the drop-down menu seems to be the kind of main patent that people were after. But they got the whole portfolio and the whole package of assets in this buyout. So Gateway 2000 ended up seeing the Amiga as a valuable asset. They successfully bought it out for a reported $4 million. So who are Gateway 2000? Well, Gateway 2000 were a PC retailer. They were founded in 1985 on a farm outside Iowa. Tom Wyatt, his brother Norm Jr., and Mike Hammond started Gateway 2000 with a $10,000 loan secured by Wyatt's grandmother. And they were an American computer hardware company. They developed, manufactured, supported, and had a wide range of personal computers, computer monitors, servers, accessories, and they were an innovator in low-end computers, so they made the first sub-$1,000 name brand PC, which was the all-in-one Astro. It was famously known for its cow pattern, and, all the boxes would have cow patterns printed on them, and they'd have huge advertising campaigns all about the countryside and about cows and farming. It was quite surreal, to be honest. They were a good company, though. They did produce some quality products, and there's some really nice Gateway cases and PCs out there. Gateway had a patent agreement with Microsoft as it was one of their distributors. They had this kind of deal with a lot of their distributors, and the idea was that they would grow and share patents with Microsoft. Now, upon being successful, they decided to put the Amiga assets into a separate subsidiary of Gateway 2000, meaning Gateway did not own the controlling majority share. They didn't want Microsoft to access these patents, as it would kind of invalidate Gateway's ability to use them, and they saw them as something really valuable. This means the Amiga portfolio was in a separate division and not under full control of Gateway's upper management. As with Escom, Gateway did not realise what they had purchased, and that the Amiga market still had a strong presence and a resilient yet battered community. As soon as they purchased the portfolio, news organisations started contacting them, and Amiga users absolutely bombarded them with letters. Now, there was this ideological divide within Gateway. There was a new group of upper management, and some of the old school people were really not kind of liking the direction they were going. They saw the PC market as being overcrowded and wanted a diversity of products. So there was a new head, and that was Jeff Whiteson, and Jim Collas was the head of product development. So he saw the Amiga subsidiary, Amiga International, as a good idea and a good route to spark innovation, and it benefited by being shielded from what was happening at the other part of Gateway, because remember, they didn't have the controlling share. So, this was like a separate company and division within Gateway. So working for them would mean, these clashes wouldn't go on with the upper management, hopefully.
We completed the transaction through the German Bankruptcy Court. It has now been approved by the German Regulatory Council. We are not disclosing terms of the transaction, but I would like you to know the transaction is completed. Amiga will now be known by its parent corporate name. The parent corporate name of Amiga will be Amiga International, which will be listed as a wholly owned subsidiary of Gateway. It will continue to run as an autonomous company providing services, products, and developments to the Amiga community.
So Amiga International was formed with some old Escom and Commodore legacy staff. So they got Petro Chischenko, the ex-Commodore manager, as a kind of bridge to the classic and the old community, and he was very much a figurehead. They also brought in Dr. Alan Havemos, who was an ex-director of software development for Commodore. They had Joe Torre as well, who was working on the hardware side of stuff. And Jim Collas decided to head this new team with the ex-Commodore staff and a mix of Gateway executives in separate offices from Gateway. So they had their own little separate section, and 10 people worked away. They kind of referred to themselves as Amiga Rebels, and tried to lay out a new plan and vision for the future of the Amiga brand.
The Amiga market cannot afford a split, ladies and gentlemen. We must go together into one direction. For us to keep the market alive, is necessary to assist many companies in developing products through broad licensing. Use industry standard components to make it cheaper to produce, faster to develop, and easier to operate.
Amiga International must have got some marketing budget, because at the time they decided to revive the Amiga brand and appeal to the current community, but also show the world that the Amiga was back. Now, the form that this took was a very interesting one. They first decided to print t-shirts, socks, have all sorts of stuff, matchboxes, Amiga Cola, Amiga Nokia phone covers, and they just basically branded absolutely everything. But they also decided to have an Amiga official dance act. Now, I saw this thing in person. It was massively embarrassing. It was an Amiga song that was performed around Amiga shows by a group called Annex. And this went on for quite a few years. They were going around Amiga shows, performing this absolutely awful 90s dance, and they created a tune which was called Back for the Future Amiga. And here's a little bit of that song now, just so you can live in the 90s and enjoy that real cheese. As Gateway 2000 started to struggle in sales and the direction started to change, Amiga International tried to seek out external investors and break free from this internal power struggle that was going on with the company. They came up with a plan to revive the Amiga, and it was quite ambitious, and they would also offer some basic support for the current Amiga market. Now, the idea was to totally cut with tradition from the architecture and create something new, very much like when Apple changed from 68K to PowerPC and absorbed the next computers. The plan was to develop a set of devices aiming to turn the Amiga into something that was part of your everyday life. So in 1997, internet connectivity was not like today. People weren't constantly connected. A lot of their items and devices weren't connected, and they aimed to create this gaming multimedia system, a developer's machine as well for serious applications, and a tablet. Now, this would all go under the Amiga brand. Gateway was a well-connected company at the time, and all of this didn't really seem out of the realms of possibility, particularly seeing that they'd created some hardware before, and they knew the graphics companies, and they were actually a really big company. Now, the glue to hold this all together would be the software, and that would be the Amiga operating environment. Devices would become an Amiga object, and these would run in the Amiga operating environment, very much like the kind of Internet of Things we see today. So if you had a device that would enable Amiga objects, they would become part of it, no matter if it was an Amiga device or something else that they'd had to deal with. It would also come with an App Store-like function, enabling micropayments and offering developers to share revenue. Now, that's really interesting because that's very much like the kind of app stores that you get now. Many Amiga developers were really excited about this, and they saw it as a way of porting their existing legacy apps to new systems and reviving the market because there was a big library of existing software out there. In this period, it was a really tough time all over the computer industry. Apple had just been saved from bankruptcy by $150 million investment from Microsoft, and Steve Jobs had just been bought back as CEO. So the aim was to take on that kind of creative market, offer an alternative to Apple at the time. With a strong history of gaming, they might have made some small gains in that market and made some space for the Amiga to come back. In 1998, Gateway 2000 announced its plans for the Amiga Multimedia Convergence Computer, which was known as the Amiga MCC. It was a multimedia machine with standard ATX motherboard, support for a DVD, 4 USB ports, the internet, set-top box function, and support for 3D gaming. They talked about the specs. There's not much details on it. They had this magic chip that was going to do a lot of stuff that they never really released any info on. Now, they showed designs of this prototype to the excitement of Amiga fans and the shock of mainstream press, who weren't really sure if Gateway were actually going to do anything with the Amiga brand. They had not chosen the architecture for the machine, but they were in discussion with Transmeter, and that ended up collapsing after Gateway saw it as too limited to achieve what they wanted to achieve. Now, another huge issue, as with the Mac, was moving on to this new architecture. How would the operating system work? How would it be supported? What would it be based on? And initially there were discussions of a contract with QNX. Now, QNX was a really impressive, efficient operating system, and really a lot of chatter happened about it at the time because it was able to launch off a single floppy disk, which was just amazing and really, grabbed the heart of the Amiga fans. They saw this as a really good approach and a successful way to go. But in an apparent breach of contract with QNX, they ended up going to the kind of rival at the time, which was that third-party product company, Phase 5, that were making the accelerator boards and porting its Neutrino operating system to the PowerPC cards. So that left Amiga International without an OS to go on to, and the Amiga community were very upset with the sudden change. They announced it would change the OS kernel from QNX to Linux. So Jim Collas ended up meeting the creator of Linux, Linus Torvalds, and discussed the plans, and apparently he liked them. They also had plans to tour Amiga events with Linus and get the community on board. Now, sadly, all of this stuff did not end up happening. The Amiga would not be owned by a huge corporation again. It would go off into obscurity, and these plans would be kind of rehashed in the future, but never to the scale and have the financial backing and the kind of money that they could have had and the success that they could have had at this really late point in their life. Now, the story goes that Jim Collas had a really good relationship with Ted Wyatt, but the CEO at the time, Wyzen, decided to shut down the Amiga subsidiary just as Wyatt had gone on holiday. Now, he ended up shutting down the whole MCC project, killing off the Amiga project, maybe in a kind of revenge move against Jim Collas, and surprisingly he was actually sacked a couple of months later. At the time, Amiga fans were kind of holding out for this last bit of hope, and there was a huge mass exodus, and then we end up into the Amiga wilderness years. Now, the Amiga did get sold on, and it got sold on to a group of ex-Gateway employees who managed to get some venture capitalists and form Amino Developments. Now, it entered this dark period for many years and trailed off into obscurity, but thankfully the Amiga survives today as a hobby system, and it's driven by the passion of its users, nostalgia, and a few small companies. Now, these folks at the moment are keeping the Amiga alive, and there's some amazing stuff happening in the Amiga community. Still hardware development, so all is not lost. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be doing more of these documentary style videos on my channel, so don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out my podcast every single week, The Retro Hour, and we interview a developer, a game maker, a musician, somebody behind the scenes every single Friday, and it's awesome. So check that out. Thanks so much for watching. See ya.